In this video, we're going to think a little bit more about the relationship between language and power. I'm going to do this by drawing some connections between what we learned about Black English in our first unit and what we're learning about the history of English as it was spoken in England. So we're going to start by looking at the word ain't. Some people say that ain't isn't a word. That makes no sense because if people use it and understand it, then it is a word. It was first used in print in 1706 in England. It was not considered an incorrect word or an improper word. It was just a contraction. So in the same way that aren't is a contraction of are not, and isn't is a contraction of is not, ain't is a slightly modified contraction of am not. Later on in the United States, in the early 19th century, in other words, in the early 1800s, people started to think of ain't as improper or incorrect, and they did this largely because it was used by stigmatized people. When I say stigmatized people, I mean people who are judged to be less good or proper than other people. Generally, these are oppressed groups of people, poor whites and Black folk in this case. Because of racism and white supremacy culture, ain't was considered an incorrect or improper word because of who used the word. Ain't later became controversial in the 1970s when Webster's dictionary announced that it would include ain't in the dictionary. Some people got upset and they created their own dictionary, which they called the American Heritage Dictionary. Their idea was that only correct words, so-called correct words, should be in the dictionary, and that the job of the dictionary editors is to decide what is correct and what is incorrect. This conflict is often referred to as the dictionary wars. It was a time when people were arguing over the function of a dictionary. The American Heritage supporters felt that a dictionary should be proscriptive, and that means that it should only list the correct words. It should proscribe what is correct. So if someone says, that word is not in the dictionary, so it's not a word, they're being proscriptive. The people who supported the Webster's dictionary believed the dictionary should be descriptive, which meant that they just report words that people use without judgment, so anyone can look up a word and find out what it means. How did it turn out? If you go to the American Heritage Dictionary and you look up the word ain't, you will find it in the dictionary. And that's because at this point, everyone agrees, maybe just about everyone agrees, that dictionaries should be descriptive. They should just include the words that people are using without judging them. And in fact, each year, dictionary editors announce what words they will include in their new edition of a dictionary. So here are the words, according to Webster's, that are going to be included as of September 2023. I don't even know what some of those words mean, so hopefully you guys can help your English teacher out. But I did want to point out a couple that struck my eye. The first one is generative AI. You know, that technology existed before September 2023, but we started really thinking about it and feeling concerned about it in 2022. So now that this is not something the only computer programmers talk about it, it's a word that's kind of out there in the air being talked about. It appears in the dictionary. I think rage quit and quiet quit, pretty interesting that those are in the dictionary. Those are new ways of thinking about quitting. I mean, probably people rage quitted before, but I think that after COVID, people started rethinking their relationship to work. And so we needed these new words to talk about how people decide to quit. So those concepts existed, maybe even those phrases existed, but this is the year that they show up in the dictionary. Or forever chemical. We've had forever chemicals for a really long time, but it's only recently that we've been getting really concerned about what happens when we have chemicals that don't break down in nature, that will always exist, and what that does to our environment. Finally, my favorite, kayfabe, which refers to the idea that professional wrestlers should always be in character if they are in front of the public in any way, that they shouldn't be themselves, they should always be their character self. That concept has been around, I think, even back into the 60s or 70s, but it appears in the dictionary in September 2023. Why? I don't know. That's something that's interesting to think about. I don't know the answer, but I think it's very interesting that there it is. Okay, so back to 1066. Hopefully you remember the Norman invasion. It marked the shift from Old English to Middle English. The winners were the French-speaking Normans. The losers were the Anglo-Saxon speakers of Old English. King William, first Duke William, then King William, installed his French-speaking allies in positions of power in England and imposed feudalism on the Anglo-Saxon people. There was a very clear distinction between the winners, who spoke French, and the losers, who spoke Old English. So this is a place where we can see what happens when stigma is imposed on language. So let me show you the world of the Anglo-Saxon serfs. Remember, the serfs were the ones who belonged to the land and therefore belonged to the lord, and they couldn't leave. They had to work the land. So these people, part of their job was to take care of the animal. And so our word for a lot of farm animals are from the Old English. For example, cow was called koe, and that word became cow during the Great Vowel Shift. Pig was called swoon, and that became the word swine. Sheep were called skep, and that became the word sheep. And a calf was called a calf, and that became the word calf. So now let's see how the Norman rulers are doing. There they are, having a feast. So when they encounter the animal, it's on their plate in the form of meat. So the French-speaking Normans used their French word for the animal, not the word for the meat, but the word for the animal. So when they looked at the dead cow on their plate, they said, buff, and that became the word beef. When they looked at the swoon, which we would say swine, but they said swoon, they said their word for pig, pork. That became our word for the meat. Skep became mutton, because the French word for sheep is mouton. And calf became veal, because the French word for a calf is veau. It's actually really unusual to have a different word for the animal and for the meat, but this oddity of the English language is a result of the Norman invasion and a result of valuing one language over the other and power imbalances between these two different language speakers. And actually, this is a characteristic of English in general. We often have multiple words for the same basic concept. So let me walk you through a couple of examples here. Excuse me for cursing, but you know, if you say fuck in front of your grandmother, that's probably not cool, right? But if you wanted to be polite, you could say the word fornicate. Same with the word sweat, a little bit kind of ruder, a little rougher versus perspire, or shit, which is another curse word, versus defecate, which is just the same word. So the interesting thing is that the words on the left are just the Old English words for those things. So the Old English word for having sex was fuck. It wasn't a dirty word, but because the losers of the war said it, it came to be understood as a dirty word. Versus the French word for the same activity, fornicate, perspire, defecate, those became the politer, more appropriate words to use. The next four are the meat examples that I just gave you. The left is the Old English, the right is from the French. And then over time, those words evolve to be the words that are on the list. Then if you look at the other ones, you're going to see that a lot of these words are what we would call synonyms. They're the same word, they're the two different words for the same thing. But each one, there's like a slight shade of meaning between them, right? Look on the right side, a baby versus an infant. I mean, it's the same thing, but there's a slightly different like feeling for those two different words, or dirt and soil. You know, you plant your vegetables in the soil, not the dirt, but they're really the same thing, right? Or down near the bottom, irk and irritate. Irk is like kind of words that you kids use because it's considered a slightly more informal term, or irritate. They're both the same thing, but there's just a different feeling to them. So if you look at the words on the left in general, they tend to be considered less polite than the words on the right. And the words on the left are maybe more simple, and the words on the right are like a slightly fancier, like what we would think of as a 10-point word, right? And the words on the left tend to be shorter, and the words on the right tend to be longer. All the words on the left are from Old English, and all the words on the right are from French. So here's what happens when power and language interact. It affects the way that you think about the meaning of the word. So now let's look at the list of 100 most commonly used English words. And we'll look at them a little bit more in class, and I'll point some things out to you, like the fact that he is used more than the word than she. That feels weird to me. But the thing I want you to see right now is that if you scan down them, they're really short words. They're all short, basic, direct words. And pretty much all of them are from the Old English. So most of our basic words, the, to, from, about, good, well, first, those are Old English words. Those are like our basic words. Our fancier words, our 10-point words, the words that we use less frequently, they tend to be from the French. And for class, I'd like you to think a little bit about why it is that our most common words are from Old English and our 10-point classroom words are from French. So, I have some concluding thoughts for you. I like to think of English as a great, glorious mess. It's not a better language. It does have more words, but that doesn't make it better. Like I said, that just makes it different, right? It's a mutt language, like it's a mixture of a lot of different languages. And that's one of the reasons why it's a really hard language to learn. It has a Germanic root, Old English is Germanic, with a Romance language, French is a Romance language, kind of decorations around the edge. And those two languages don't always mesh up neatly. So what makes one word more acceptable than the other would be the power differences, right? So while it's important to learn the French words, I think we should also celebrate the Germanic words. And I think it's also important to notice that the Old English words survived, right? The fact that they survived is because they mattered to the people who spoke them. Even though the language of power was French, the Old English held on to and valued their language as a way to celebrate their identity. And I think that that's another connection that we can make with Black English. Black English is a way to celebrate and recognize the struggles and the successes of African Americans in the United States, even when the world is prejudiced. And so I think that we can make really clear connections between the English that we speak now and a history of both oppression and stigmatization, but also resistance and celebration.